Today's episode is brought to you by Old Glory, your number one destination for officially licensed music, movies, and sports merch. We are talking more than 300,000 items, from Bob Marley to the Beatles to the Backstreet Boys, if that's your thing, to the NBA, NFL, NCAA, movies, superheroes, comic books, video games, and pop culture icons from across the spectrum. Plus, Old Glory has been a family-owned superstore since 1969, so you know they've stood the test of time. Their quality and customer service are the real deal. They got graphic tees, hoodies, hats, jerseys, and gifts for every fan in your life, plus a little something for yourself, I'm sure. And every order ships free the same day with standard shipping, so there is no hassle in getting your favorite gear right to your door. And right now, you can use the code MIMS25 to get 15% off your entire order at oldglory.com. Now, some of that does come back to make it make sense, but hey, it's a win-win for both of us, right? Again, that is MIMS25 at oldglory.com. All right, let's get back to the show. This week, the Supreme Court gutted what was left of the Voting Rights Act. Now, I talked about that before earlier this week in the podcast, but it's not just that. They sent our national fight over gerrymandering into overdrive, into hyperdrive, into outer space, out of the Milky Way. I've taken to calling it Gerrymaxxing, the election equivalent to Looksmaxxing, taking hammers to our election systems and our districts to try to make them into something grotesque. And it is happening and will be happening at an alarming rate. And so this week, I turn to who I always turn to when these things come up, Dave Daley from FairVote. Dave is the author of a number of books about gerrymandering, how we broke our political system by using this process, and I think, crucially, how we can fix it. And Dave was so good in our conversation about what this case before the Supreme Court was, called Louisiana v. Callais, which we do break down this decision, but also what happens next, what it means for Black and brown voters across the country, what it means for every single voter across the country, and just about every single state across the country going forward. And I think most importantly, how we put Humpty Dumpty back together here if we can. It's Friday, May 1st, 2026. I'm Grant Hermes. This is Make It Make Sense. And let's get to my conversation with Dave Daley. Well, Dave, thank you again for coming back on the show. I wish that it was when you came on the show, we had something good about voting to talk about, but thank you for being here nonetheless, as always.
I am the voice of gloom and doom. People only like me when there's bad news. Even then, they don't like me that much, but you know.
You should just always come with a party hat anyway, just to liven up the mood.
I'm a lot of fun at parties, let me tell you.
Yeah, I bet. So before we get into the downstream of this Supreme Court decision, can you walk me through some of the nitty-gritty of this case? Listeners will have gotten a basic footing of this in yesterday's episode. And if you haven't listened to that from yesterday, pause it here, go back and listen to the first 10 minutes of yesterday's episode, then come back and listen to this. You'll have a good base. But walk me through some of the basics of this case before we get to what the Supreme Court actually did this week.
Sure. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the way that it has been reauthorized and interpreted through court precedents over the years, has required the drawing of majority-minority seats in places where minority voters exist in sufficient population numbers, where they live in a compact community, and where there is a history of racialized voting.
Right.
So that includes, many states across the South. Majority-minority districts have had to be drawn in those states in order to protect those voters from being sliced and diced and spread across multiple districts so that they have no ability to elect a member of their own choosing. This has been the law for a long time, many decades now. Voters in Louisiana, which is a state that is about 1/3 Black and has 6 congressional seats, 4 of those districts are drawn so that they elect Republicans. 2 of those districts are drawn so that they elect Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those Democrats right now um, are Black Democrats.
Right.
And white voters in Louisiana essentially challenged the map as a racial gerrymander that violated the rights of white Republicans in Louisiana. It's those white people in Louisiana always having their rights trampled on, and in
Right.
these United States of America. Um, and essentially what they said was, these two districts were drawn with racial matters in mind, and they shouldn't have been. And because they were not, we were not able to elect a member of our choosing, which, is not exactly what the Voting Rights Act was intended to remedy.
Right.
But given this court, and given the way that this court has been ruling on Voting Rights Act questions now for the last dozen years, this was a question that they were eager to weigh in on.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we should put it plainly, too, that this has been Chief Justice John Roberts' real aim and goal for the last, I would argue, maybe 40 years. I mean, certainly since it was what he worked on when he worked in the Reagan White House, and his aims have been to chip away at the Voting Rights Act since he's been on the bench as Chief Justice.
And you're right, dating back to those very early days when he first arrives in Washington, 1981, 1982, as a young aide in the Reagan Justice Department. Imagine getting up out of bed every day for the last 45 years and saying, how can I chip away at the most successful piece of civil rights legislation in American history? But
I know.
that is what John Roberts has done. And, gosh darn it, when you put your mind to something, sometimes you succeed.
Yeah, John Roberts, he's going to be known for his stick-to-itiveness about stripping civil rights away from people. That's the thing his court's going to get known for. Jesus. So then, this week, the court says that we are going to basically gut this section of the VRA, that no longer will states be required to have these majority-minority districts because racism doesn't exist anymore. Like, what is the rationale behind this? What do they say, and what are they trying to say with this?
Yeah. In many ways, it does come down to that. It comes down to this court going on vibes and saying things have changed in the South. This just isn't necessary anymore. In his opinion, Samuel Alito tries to make the argument that really what he's doing is, freshening the Voting Rights Act. He's just giving it a more modern update.
Right.
It's a remix. But that is because Sam Alito is a coward who is unwilling to say what he's actually doing here. He's trying to disingenuously pretend that he's giving the Voting Rights Act a fresh coat of paint, when really what he is doing is rewriting the text, scribbling over what Congress wrote, and creating entirely new standards that are impossible to reach, and pretending that that's something new. And then he has the chutzpah to say, well, if Congress doesn't like this, Congress can write a new law. The thing is, Congress already wrote a law.
Right.
It was called the Voting Rights Act of 1965. They reauthorized it in 1982. They reauthorized it in 1982. They reauthorized it in 2006, nearly unanimously, 390 to 33 in the House, 98 to nothing in the Senate. And it was signed into law by an ebullient George W. Bush on the White House lawn. So the law exists. And these conservative justices who, cosplay as if they only care about text and originalism and, the actual words and history here, are really interested in in desired outcomes. This is a court that is doing politics. It's not doing law.
So what was the standard and what is the standard now for these new maps that'll have to get drawn?
Yeah. And essentially, the standard had been, as I said, there was a test from the 80s called the Gingell's test. And that essentially said that if minority voters lived in sufficient numbers in a compact enough space in a state with racially polarized voting, they needed to have the opportunity to elect a member of their own choosing. And there was a really simple reason for that, right? Because otherwise, in Louisiana or in Alabama, it would be really simple simply to draw district lines that carved Birmingham or New Orleans or Baton Rouge into 6 pieces and attached a small piece of that district to a bunch of, larger, whiter ones. It would be really simple, as we are learning this week, to draw a 6-0 map in Alabama or Louisiana. The Voting Rights Act protected against that. They said, if those conditions exist, you have to draw a majority-minority seat. You have to give minority communities an opportunity to elect a member of their own choosing. Essentially, what Alito has done is replace this with a very, very impossible to reach standard that is centered around showing intent. You have to effectively show that the lawmakers who did this had only one thing in mind when they were drawing these districts, and that was to suppress Black voters. And that's a difficult standard because there's lots of other things you can say, even when that's what you want to do.
Right.
You can say, I'm drawing this map to screw over Democrats, not to hurt Black people. I'm drawing a map to maximize the political power of my side. This is a partisan gerrymander. It doesn't have anything to do with race. And you can say those things. They're probably not true. But, again, intent is very, very difficult to prove. But again, this is why it's so important to talk about what this court has done. Because Congress in 1982, when it reauthorizes the Voting Rights Act, it explicitly says, this is not about proving intent.
Right.
The effect is what matters. If this has the effect of diluting votes, it is not okay. We are clearly saying that this is not an intent test. And Congress laid this out in 1982 in response to a case out of Alabama, which was called Mobile versus Bolden, in which the Supreme Court said, you're going to have to show intent.
Right.
And the result of this was to put an immediate stop to all Voting Rights Act enforcement at the Department of Justice. It almost couldn't be done. You would need emails that proved it. And let me tell you, email didn't exist in 1980, so it was even harder to prove then, right? But the really interesting thing about this, and then I'll shut up, is that that's what John Roberts was working on back in 1981 and 1982 as a young aide. He was handed the Voting Rights Act portfolio at the Department of Justice, and he was leading the fight within the Reagan White House to keep the intent standard from Mobile v. Bolden. John Roberts lost that fight in Congress in 1982. but gosh darn it, he kept at it.
Yeah, but mission accomplished this
And
week. He
thanks to his
won that fight.
persistence in 2026 at the U.S. Supreme Court, he has written over what Congress said back in 1982.
I mean, it would seem to me that what this is going to do is embolden a lot of smart races in a lot of places to do the things that they've always wanted to do. I was looking at some of these new maps that would make a 6-0 Alabama or a Louisiana, and darn it, if the lines for these districts don't line up right where the major urban centers are, right where a lot of these black populations live, right, and that would strike me as not having passed these tests before. But they will now, unless you get, I guess, a dumb racist who over an email or on video or whatever says like, boy, we really screwed over the black folks in Montgomery.
You see, the amazing thing is that there's lots of dumb racists out there and they say all this stuff, and in case after case, it's still not enough for Alito and Roberts, right?
Right.
Right. Even back in Mobile v. Bolden back in 1980, that there was all kinds of proof of what they were doing. Everybody said it out loud. But even that proof wasn't enough to, satisfy those judges. Because Alito also says you have to assume good intent. You have to assume good faith, a positive intent, an open mind.
Okay. I mean, that's I don't understand that either. There are people who are alive right now who were still in schools that were segregated. Like we're still under desegregation orders, like that's in living memory. So it's bizarre to me that we would still have, that's the approach to this. It's not so distant.
It's only bizarre if your intention is to stop it.
Right.
If your intention is to return to those days, then this makes a perfect sense. When Congress reauthorized the Voting Rights Act in 2006, they were afraid of what this Supreme Court might do. And so they went and they put together a 16,000-page record. It was the longest record ever assembled in support of a piece of legislation ever. And what it did was it detailed story after story from all of these states explaining why this was still necessary now. That this was not something that had been fixed with the Voting Rights Act forever. These were not stories from 1956 or in some grainy black and white news reel. These were stories from places like Kilmichael, Mississippi in 2001, a small town where for years the white population tried to suppress the votes of the growing black population. And when it finally became clear that in the spring of 2001, Kilmichael was going to elect its first black mayor, they canceled the election. And a Mississippi court said, yeah, okay, you can go ahead and do that. It was only because of the Voting Rights Act 18 months later that this election was actually held. This is 2001. This is this century. Stories like this are taking place in these United States of America. But when John Roberts started looking at the Voting Rights Act in a series of cases that began in 2009, when 2001 was even more recent history, stories like this simply didn't matter to him. That congressional record didn't matter. Roberts believed that things had changed in the South, and so things had changed in the South.
And things are going to change in the South, just not in the way that we are talking here. I mean, we are talking about what? Wholesale flipping of states, fully red seat control, 12 to 14. I've seen as many as 14 congressional seats that could be under entirely Republican.
As many as 19. I mean, if you take the seats from Florida, you're talking about 4 from Florida, maybe an additional 2 or 3 from Texas. Two from Louisiana, two from Alabama, two from Georgia, additional seats in Tennessee, South Carolina, Mississippi. Maybe you can get one more in North Carolina. You can probably take the Kansas City. I'm sorry, you can probably take the St. Louis seat in
Hmm.
Missouri. You're getting pretty close to 19 seats. You're looking at a nearly entirely red South. Probably still a couple of blue districts in Atlanta,
Yeah.
a couple in Florida, but all of these other states, Tennessee, South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, they are going to go 100% red. And all the blue states are going to retaliate ahead of 2028, right?
Yeah.
Illinois and Maryland and New York and probably California again are going to go 100% blue. We've we've seen this before. We've had maps of entirely red and entirely blue before. Back then, we called it the Union and the Confederacy.
Right. I mean, that's what I was thinking here. I've been jokingly calling whatever's going to happen next Gerrymaxxing, kind of like Looksmaxxing or whatever. Like it's this, like we're bone smashing our own, taking a hammer to our own faces, right? For to do this, whatever's happening here, like it, because that it does seem like that's what's bound to happen. It's this mutually assured destruction of division that we were on the rails to with how bad the gerrymandering was getting. And you and I have talked about that before. But this is apart from that. This is a whole different animal here. What are the things that you are watching right now? And then we can get into like Louisiana canceling elections and the downstream effects of that stuff. But let's talk about this sort of gerrymaxing thing.
I'm going to steal that line, and it's going to make me relevant on TikTok.
You bet.
Just, I'm just saying, that is my ticket to
You're welcome.
relevancy amongst Gen Beta. Um, um, no, I think that we are headed towards really dangerous times, and I think people don't fully understand just how scary and consequential this decision is going to be. A handful of southern states are going to attempt to draw new lines ahead of the midterms. Louisiana will get away with it. Tennessee might, South Carolina and Mississippi might as well. Um, when you add that to the seats that Florida just took, that's probably about 8 or 9
Hmm.
that will be added to the Republican column ahead of the 2026 midterms. Does that affect the outcome of the midterms? I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say. Right now the balance of power is 3 seats, so it can be pretty close. 9 seats matters, right? The gerrymander in North Carolina, it gave
Right.
Republicans 3 seats. That was the margin of the majority. So who knows? Trump is very unpopular. Ordinarily, the party in power loses seats in the midterms, but Democrats aren't that popular either in
Right.
large parts of the country, and there's a dwindling number of competitive districts. So they're going to have to be perfect in the states that they can win. Um, as you look ahead to 2028, what you will see are Republicans moving forward in the states that they're not moving forward in now. So that's when Georgia will go again.
Yeah.
Alabama probably can't go this time, but they'll go next time. Florida and Texas will take another crack. Missouri will take a look at the St. Louis seat, maybe North Carolina. And then Republicans will take a look at the seats that they left on the table in 2026. There's 2 in Indiana, 1 in Kentucky, 1 in Kansas, maybe 1 in New Hampshire if they can hold the trifecta there.
Hmm.
I think they'll look at Nebraska, that blue dot in Omaha.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Democrats are likely to take that seat with the retirement of Don Bacon. But if Republicans can get a certain concentration of voices in their caucus in the state legislature there, they could redraw that ahead of time. Um, And then you take a look at the Democrats. They will go after New York, where there's probably 3 to 5 seats. They will look to unravel the commission in Colorado, which is another 4 seats if you draw an 8-0 map there. They probably go back to California and do another initiative and try to draw a 52-0 map. I mean, I guarantee that map exists in some strategist's drawer in Sacramento. They will probably go into Illinois and try to draw 17-0 in Illinois. I forget if I mentioned Maryland already, but there's Maryland. Other states you might look at would be Washington, New Jersey. These states have commissions. I don't know if there's a ton you can gain there, but a little bit. If Democrats can win trifectas in Wisconsin and Minnesota this fall, those seats come on the table. I don't think you can draw a very effective map in Wisconsin that it gets you much, but you might try.
Oregon, maybe?
Oregon is 5-1 right now, so maybe there's a seat in Oregon you could go after. Again, that's, in some of these states like Oregon, I think Democrats could take the seat in Maryland really easily and go 8-0 without any fear. Could you go 6-0 in Oregon? I mean, Eastern Oregon is pretty conservative. I'm not, it's practically Idaho. And so I don't know if you could completely draw a 6-0 map there, but maybe you could. I mean, so what you begin to see here, right, is I'm naming states from all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to affect everyone everywhere. And this is going to decimate minority representation. It's going to probably lead to the largest reduction in minority representation in Congress since Reconstruction. It will gut minority representation in state houses. It's going to be really dangerous in places like Kilmichael and, school boards and city councils and judicial races that no one pays any attention to around the country. But it's also going to affect rural Democrats in all of these states that are going to be drawn into red districts. It's going to affect urban Republicans and Republicans all over blue states. If you live in Colorado or Oregon or Maryland or anywhere across the South, New York, this is going to dramatically change what representation looks like. And it's going to be bad. We only had 37 districts in 2026. Excuse me. We only had 37 districts in 2024 that were competitive within 5 percentage points. By 2028, you might be able to count them on both hands. It'll be single digits. Out of 435 races for Congress, almost none of them will actually be a mystery. You won't even have to hold the election.
Right.
You could just draw the lines. And that means that, members aren't accountable. It means that, primaries matter more than anything else. It means lots and lots of really bad things.
Yeah. It's all the worst parts of gerrymandering that I've talked a lot about, that you and I have talked a lot about, that you have written, tens of thousands of words about, right?
I fixed it all.
It'll make parties more extreme, because if primaries matter more, it means you've got to run further to the fringes of the candidate who's there already. There's no pulling somebody from the middle, because why would you moderate? Because that's never going to work. It means that the people who are the minority voices who don't have representation are going to have to be louder and more extreme, and you're going to get more extreme versions of those parties. It makes everything less fair for everybody. And it's the worst version of our political angels, and our political demons, rather. And I was talking this morning with a friend of mine about whether or not, if what we're looking at is kind of this gamesmanship of how chess players will sit at a board and they'll make a couple moves and then they'll play out the game in their minds. And then at a certain point, they'll both be 7 moves ahead, and one of them will be like, it's checkmate. It's done. Is there a point here where we don't have to get to what we just talked about with all those states fully gerrymaxed and everything else, and then we're stuck like that? Is there a point in which it becomes so untenable for both sides that somebody in Congress just goes, we're just going to ban partisan gerrymandering? Is there any situation where that happens?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Democrats tried back in 2021 when they had a trifecta. It didn't go anywhere. No Republicans were willing to join in. I mean, I blame the Democrats for not getting it done, but they didn't have any help either. And the filibuster, gets in the way.
Right.
You can't do everything with just one side. I don't think there are many voices on the Republican side right now that are looking to ban partisan gerrymandering. Democrats at least continue to say that we're only doing this because we have to, because you started this in Texas, and we commit to ending it if we take power.
Right.
But they have to take a lot of power to be able to do that, and that's very difficult. There are ways to fix this that are nonpartisan and that would fix it everywhere nationally, and the very best way, I think, is a more proportional House along the lines of the Fair Representation Act, larger multi-member districts, proportional ranked choice voting. Instead of having district lines determine winners and losers, you have much bigger districts, and the states' politics and their racial backgrounds and demographics are actually represented almost perfectly. I mean, if you had more proportional maps, you would get a 6-3 delegation in Massachusetts of Democrats over Republicans, and a 6-3 Republican delegation in Tennessee, right?
Right.
You could fix it every place. And you would still allow members of minority communities to elect people and feel as if they had a voice in their politics. So what I think has to happen is that, I don't see reform coming from within the Republican Party right now. And I think the Republicans understand that the math is on their side long term. So I'm not sure that there will be folks on that side that are willing to try to solve this, especially since, we've gotten to this point with so many gerrymandered districts that the people who are now in office are the ones who have won in these non-competitive districts by going all the way to one side in the primary, and are probably the least interested in solving it, and super vulnerable if you actually had a fair election.
Right.
So we have the wrong people in office to fix the problem.
Right.
We have the people in office who are there because they are the problem. And so if Democrats can win a trifecta, I think they have to advance a really meaty package of structural reforms that fix the Supreme Court, that fix gerrymandering, that, take a look at, I would suggest it's time to take a look at the malapportionment of the U.S. Senate as well, right? I mean, by 2035, you're going to have 70% of Americans living in 15 states with 30 senators. That's a problem. I mean, so there are nonpartisan fixes we can make in the service of a stronger representative democracy for everyone. We ought to start talking about what they are and how we do it.
What does this mean then at the state level for statewide races? If we get states that are fully one-party control when it comes to the congressional seats, it would strike me that gubernatorial races and Senate races are going to be the games in town for a lot of people. Or do you think we're going to start seeing places that are like, I don't know, Tennessee or Georgia that are fully red when it comes to Congress, but then you're going to get a Democratic senator or two Democratic senators coming out of a place like Georgia?
Maybe, right? I mean, statewide offices are tough to gerrymander.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you
Yeah.
can try and suppress the vote in those places, right? But you look at a place like Georgia, right? I mean, Georgia has two U.S. senators right now,
Right.
but they are likely to draw themselves, a map that gives 85% of the seats to Republicans. And their state legislature is probably also about to be gerrymandered in such a way that Republicans have supermajorities. But it's entirely possible that Georgia could elect a Democratic governor
Right.
in 2028, 2026, when Brian Kemp retires.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why they'll probably move on a new map before Kemp is gone.
Yeah.
Just so nothing can be vetoed by the potential of a Democratic governor there. But it becomes checkmate, right? I mean, once you've gerrymandered yourself into supermajorities, and once you've made it so that a statewide official, like, look at North Carolina or something, uh, then you begin stripping power from the governor and the agencies. We saw this in North Carolina. We saw this in Wisconsin. When these gerrymandered states elect Democratic governors, the gerrymandered legislatures starts stripping their power away.
Mm-hmm.
So until we stop this,
Yeah. Yeah.
until we respect elections and stop thinking that every single election is the end of the world if the other side wins, this is where we're going to be.
Before we go here, what should voters be doing right now? We've talked about these issues, and they feel so big and so insurmountable from a individual standpoint, from a on the ground standpoint. Where should people start? Where do they go if they want to do things?
Well, I think people shouldn't lose hope and shouldn't lose faith. There have been difficult times in this nation's history before, and the only way that these problems have gotten solved is by individuals standing up and demanding what's right. So we, once again, are going to be called to that kind of fight. The fight for a democracy and a representative government is never settled, right? It's a fragile thing. We all have to, stay in that fight all of the time. Democracy is a verb, and we all have to live it and demand it and fight for it. But it's not an easy fight, and I'm not sugarcoating it, right? I mean, it's not going to be easy. There are, however, solutions, and I think we all have to start talking about those solutions because they're big.
Mm-hmm.
And they're different and they're unusual. And if they're going to be one, they're probably going to be one because one party is going to come in and institute them. And so I think it's time that we all start talking. And if Democrats are going to do this, they have to lay out a vision and a plan and a dialogue that is convincing to people. They have to talk about this court. They have to talk about it's not okay to have 7 competitive districts in a nation of 435.
Right.
It's not okay to have a U.S. Supreme Court of 9 unelected people serving life terms with no ethics code, with no term limits, with no review, who can time their retirements in order to be replaced by a member of their own political party. That whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, that's kind of a bad idea.
Yeah.
I mean, Lincoln in his first inaugural said something along the lines that if the people surrender all of their power to the Supreme Court, who becomes the key arbiter on all the issues of the day, then the people have ceased to be their own rulers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're dangerously close to that spot, right? Of this court is acting like it's a super legislature. It's doing politics, not law. And how do we get it back to doing law? How do we rein in a court that's acting as if it's a super legislature? But it begins with understanding that it can happen here. It is happening here. And that if we don't find a way to take some action on this really soon, the windows for fixing it are going to close. So I think there has to be an urgency around this dialogue and debate.
Yeah. Dave, as always, man, thank you so much for coming on the show and shedding a lot of light and insight into this. I think, these are so big, but it's always great to have you here and give us some perspective on this. So really, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Have me back sometime and I'll dress up.
Yeah. I want to thank Dave again for coming on the show. You can find links to his excellent books and his work at FairVote in the description for this episode. And that is it for today's episode. If this helped you out in any way in understanding what is about to happen across the country here, share it with somebody right now. Make sure you subscribe, comment, like the show wherever you are watching it right now, and sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. Paid subscribers get access to this weekend's Make It Make Nonsense and the Things You Forgot from Civic Class newsletter, which comes out on Mondays, and of course, all of the great original reporting that I am doing all the time. I'm going to be doing a lot more talking about gerrymaxxing and this idea coming up. You're definitely not going to want to miss out on that either. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. You can tag me at Grant Hermes on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Hermes on everything else. Thank you so much for watching today. I'm Grant Hermes, and I'll talk to you next week.